This map shows the percentage of deeply religious adults across different U.S. states. Notice the clear distinction of the southern region from the rest of the country. The difference is so stark that this area has earned its own nickname, the Bible Belt. Protestant Christianity plays a significant role in the lives of people here, and the percentage of regular churchgoers is far higher than the national average. But why is this? Why is the south of the United States so much more religious than the rest of the country? After all, the New England region was originally founded by Puritans, a group of devout individuals who left Europe because they believed it was too secular. Now, however, New England is the most atheist part of the country. So what changed? To understand how the South became so religious, while other regions grew more secular, we need to go back to the founding of the first colonies. The 13 colonies had diverse religious foundations, but it was their development over time that shaped the unique religious landscape we see today. Let's start with the first permanent English colony, Jamestown, founded in Virginia in 1607. Like many other European powers of that era, Britain had economic motives for colonizing North America. Settlers were dispatched to establish a British foothold in the New World, and since they hailed from England, where the Anglican Church was the official state religion, the majority of early colonists were Anglican. However, Anglicanism was relatively new. It had only split from the Roman Catholic Church in the previous century and retained many elements of Catholic ritual and practice. It was from this tension that the Puritan movement arose. The Puritans sought to reform the Anglican Church, which they believed was still too Catholic in its practices. These efforts to reform the church led to persecution in England, forcing many Puritans to seek refuge in the New World. From 1620 to 1640, around 20,000 Puritans migrated to New England, mostly traveling as families, to create a society based on their strict interpretation of Christian doctrine. They founded the Plymouth Colony, which became the second permanent English settlement in North America, after Jamestown. As a result, the 13 colonies quickly developed a kind of religious dualism, with the northern colonies dominated by Puritanism and the southern ones remaining largely Anglican. This division was also reflected in the broader lifestyle differences between the two regions. In New England, the Puritans established communities centered around their faith. They implemented strict moral codes, with laws that governed not only public, but also private behavior. Puritan society was a theocracy, where religious leaders held significant political power, and every aspect of life was infused with religious purpose. In the southern colonies, religion was important but played a different role. These colonies, including Virginia, Maryland, and the Carolinas, were primarily founded for economic reasons, focusing on agriculture and trade. The Anglican Church was a pillar of British authority, reinforcing the societal structures that bound the southern colonies to the crown. However, there was greater religious diversity in the South, which reduced the church's role as a unifying public force. Unlike in Puritan New England, Catholics, Jews, and other Protestant denominations were present in smaller numbers, making religion less of a communal identity than it was in the North. Over time, significant changes occurred in both regions. In New England, the strict religious fervor of the first generations of Puritans gradually diminished. The early settlers were driven by a profound sense of divine mission, but their children born in America often did not share that same zeal. Economic concerns and the pursuit of material prosperity began to take precedence over religious devotion. The Puritans' strict rules became harder to enforce, and the religious homogeneity that once defined New England began to erode. An influx of immigrants with different religious views, coupled with the rise of Enlightenment ideas that emphasized reason over faith, further weakened the Puritan establishment. The South also experienced changes, though they followed a different trajectory. Ironically, the relative lack of intense religious fervor in the southern colonies may have helped Christianity thrive there in the long run. Southern religion was less dogmatic and more flexible, allowing it to adapt to the region's shifting social and economic conditions. Rather than rigidly enforcing religious orthodoxy, as was done in New England, religion in the South became more of a cultural identity than a matter of doctrinal purity. Geography played an important role in these developments as well. The challenging agricultural conditions in New England, with its rocky soil and short growing seasons, forced the region to diversify its economy. Fishing, shipbuilding, and later industry became the primary economic drivers. especially as New England cities grew through industrialization. By contrast, the South's fertile soil and favorable climate made agriculture, particularly the cultivation of cash crops like tobacco, cotton, and rice, the dominant economic activity. Large plantations relied on slave labor to sustain the region's agricultural economy, further entrenching a rural way of life that was less disrupted by urbanization and industrialization. As the economy of New England became more industrialized, the region became increasingly secular, with religion playing a less central role in public life. Meanwhile, the agrarian South maintained its rural character, and the church continued to serve as an important community institution, especially in more isolated areas where it often served as the only significant social organization. However, to fully understand the rise of religious fervor in the South, we need to consider the Great Awakening, a series of religious revivals that swept through the colonies in the 18th century. The First Great Awakening, which began in the 1730s, was a response to declining religious piety and the rise of secular ideas, particularly in the more urbanized North. Preachers like George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards traveled throughout the colonies, delivering emotional, impassioned sermons that called people to renew their faith and reject sin. These preachers rejected the formal, intellectual style of worship that had dominated the Anglican and Puritan churches, instead embracing a more personal, emotional connection with God. While the Great Awakening touched every colony, its impact was particularly pronounced in the South. The emotional populist style of the revivals resonated deeply with the Southern population, especially among the poor, who felt alienated by the established Anglican Church. In the North, the Puritan and Presbyterian Old Light churches rejected the emotionalism of the revivals, preferring a more restrained approach to worship. This led to a division between the Old Lights and the New Lights, with the latter embracing the revivalist spirit. In the South, however, there was no such resistance, and the revivals quickly spread, leading to the rapid growth of Baptist and Methodist congregations. These new denominations offered a more accessible form of Christianity. They de-emphasized the need for formal theological education, and anyone who felt called could become a preacher. This was particularly appealing in the South's rural areas, where formal church services were often infrequent. Traveling preachers brought religion to remote communities, embedding it deeply in the lives of ordinary Southerners. The Second Great Awakening, which began in the late 18th century, further solidified these trends. Outdoor revival meetings, where thousands of people would gather for days of preaching and prayer, became a hallmark of the movement. These gatherings were not limited to the South, but their impact was felt most strongly in the region, where they contributed to the continued growth of Baptist and Methodist churches. By the 1840s, the Methodist Church had become the largest Protestant denomination in the United States, with its greatest concentration of followers in the South. The legacy of the Great Awakenings extended well into the 19th and 20th centuries. Despite the bitter division over slavery and the Civil War, religion remained a central part of Southern life. By the early 20th century, the term Bible Belt had come into common usage, reflecting the region's strong religious identity. Technological advances, such as radio and television, allowed religious figures like Billy Graham to reach even wider audiences, further strengthening the influence of evangelical Christianity in the South. Today, the South remains more religious than other parts of the country, but it is important to note that overall levels of religiosity in the United States are declining. Even in the Bible Belt, younger generations are increasingly identifying as religiously unaffiliated, and the percentage of Americans who consider themselves Christian is steadily falling. In conclusion, while the South has historically been and remains more religious than other regions of the country, the U.S. as a whole is gradually moving towards secularism. It is possible that, in the not-too-distant future, Christianity may no longer hold the same dominant position in American society.